Now, a lot of people are addicted to just looking for people that are very similar to them. This is as similar as it can get. Hi everyone, this is Sam Qurashi. I used to be a psychiatric resident in an addiction hospital, and now I'm on YouTube. My producer basically shares with me videos that I've never seen before, and I just react in real time. And the series so far is My Strange Addiction, and here we go. What? Okay, I can imagine, but. Okay.
I'm Amy.
I'm Becky.
And we're 45 years old.
And we're addicted to being identical.
Hi, guys.
So good. That's perfect.
Yay. Cool.
For some reason, Amy had gained a teeny bit more weight than me.
Yeah.
And people would go like, oh, you're the big twin, you're the smaller twin. And literally from then on out,
oh, yeah.
we eat the same exact bites of food and drink the same sips of drink to stay the same weight.
Okay. This is overwhelming. It's a very short clip, but it's overwhelming. Okay, so let me just factor this in. Let me just try to. Okay. Addicted to being together, addicted to being identical is what they said. Okay, let's keep going.
No matter what. Whenever we have situations where we can't tell if they're even or not, we'll pull out the scale and weigh it.
So it looks like 2 ounces. It's perfect. We've never had our own rooms, and we don't want our own lives.
My main concern is that one would actually die before the other, and the other one would be lost completely without the other twin. I've never heard of them being in a...
It's one thing to have friends that you can't walk away from temporarily, which is what happens when you guys separate because you have different lives. When you're sisters, the bond is stronger, but at the same time in this situation, the fact that they're addicted to being identical means that they want to be walking mirrors for one another in every possible way. And they don't want to separate in any way or form. Now, the obvious question is what triggered that. The second question is how has that affected their relationships? Do they have relationships? Because this is going to get a lot more complicated. For identical twins, it isn't as complicated as people may think, but when it comes to something like that, where the twins don't want to leave, they don't want to separate, then it becomes harder for someone to date one of them. And in this situation, the idea of wanting to be together the whole time, it's because of the connection, because of the predictability. And here's what I mean by predictability. In this situation, the people we enjoy spending time with usually are people that we do have things in common, but we do appreciate the differences depending on the relationship. Differences are important to help the relationship grow. Similarities are important to create a strong foundation in terms of having familiar things that we love, that we can share together, that we can share with each other, and we can experience together. And it creates the certainty. I know you enjoy this as much as I do, and we can enjoy it together. So if there's another installment, another sequel of a movie that we both like, we can go and watch it together and we'll enjoy it. We are certain that we're going to enjoy it because we enjoy that series. We love that character. We love that franchise, for example. And there's something to be said about that. Now, a lot of people are addicted to just looking for people that are very similar to them. This is as similar as it can get. And the concept of being identical, addicted to being identical, is it comes from the addiction to predictability. So if I have a twin brother and I'm addicted to being identical with my brother. The thing is, if this is so interesting, it comes from the need to be able to predict what the other person is doing, what the other person is thinking, what the other person is, how the other person is behaving. So that concept of predictability is very important. That comes from a need for control, because one of the easiest ways for me to be in control of my life is to predict. This is how everybody operates, whether they're conscious of it or not. We need a sense of safety. That's the primary thing. To be safe, we need to feel in control. Feel in control, not necessarily be in control. Big difference. And I touched upon that previously in terms of feeling versus being. It's important to feel safe rather than be safe, because I could be surrounded by guards. I am safe, but I don't feel safe. I'm terrified. So it doesn't make a difference. What we feel matters more than who we are in terms of being versus feeling. So in this situation, we need to have a sense of safety in order for us to feel in control. Feeling in control, one of the ways to do that is to predict. And there's nothing easier to predict than having someone in your life that is identical. The problem, and I think Tony Robbins talked about this in terms of certainty versus uncertainty in relationships, and let me clarify that. So he talks about the 6 human needs, and the first 2 are basically certainty and uncertainty. In a relationship, if you are certain about everything that the other person is doing, you're more likely to get bored. On the other hand, if you're always uncertain, you can't predict anything that the other person's doing, you're going to be freaking out the whole time. You don't know if that person is going to stay with you. You don't know what that person wants. You don't know how to please the other person. So it becomes a living nightmare. The idea is we need both. You need to have a level of certainty enough for you to be comfortable and feel safe, but not enough for you to get bored. You need to have a level of uncertainty in a relationship enough to maintain the excitement, the variety. The lack of predictability creates surprise and wonder. But if you don't have uncertainty, you're going to get bored. If it's too much, if you have too much uncertainty, you're going to be living in fear. So it's about the balance, the middle ground in certainty, the middle ground in uncertainty. In this situation, what's interesting about this is they're addicted to certainty. And yet, what's interesting to me is they're not bored. It doesn't reach a point, I guess their need for being certain overcomes the fear of boredom or the fear of being boring to the other person. I think what is interesting about this is in this scenario, they're twins. So it kind of creates that balance that prevents the fear of being boring to the other person or ever worrying about the other person leaving them. They're so certain about everything. And my question is, why did that start? When did that start? And I think they mentioned 20 years ago, but let's see what happens.
A long-term relationship, and that concerns me a lot. I met this really great guy, so I set Becky up on a blind date.
Hi, Becky. Becky.
Hi, Becky.
Nice to meet you.
Don't be weirded out, but twins. My
Beautiful.
sister and
I told Jillian I would go on this blind date.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I technically didn't
She
lie.
did, we just left a little part
We just left a little part
which was
out.
me.
It's not exactly how I envisioned it.
Of course not.
So has either one of you been married, or? Tell me.
We're kind of married to each other.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Okay. That's going to be painful.
Let's go. Let's go.
Okay.
It's driving me crazy. Like, I don't even know how I'm holding myself together so well because I feel like half of my body has been cut off. I will never agree to do this ever again.
I think the idea is it's a good idea, but I don't think it's executed in the right way. What I would do differently is I would gradually increase the number or the amount of time during the day in which they're not together. And I'll make sure that even when they're not together initially, they can still be in touch briefly over the phone, but not physically together, and then start stretching the time where they don't even communicate. But I think this is something very important. Going cold turkey, in most cases, isn't really a great idea, because that sudden shift can cause a rebound effect. But when it comes to something like this, it's very important to gradually break free from something like that. This kind of behavior requires gradual separation, because they've been attached for such a long time. With every addiction to every behavior, there's a strong attachment to that behavior. One of the reasons, and I mentioned this in a previous video, is that the behavior becomes part of who you are. What you do becomes who you are. So to separate that, one thing is to reach the realization that what you do is not who you are. The second is to gradually separate what you do from who you are. Because when you do it gradually, it's more acceptable by the unconscious mind, rather than suddenly creating that break. There are exceptions to that rule, but that's not what we're talking about right now. But with something like this, it's important for a gradual separation. A gradual separation makes it easier, because sudden creates fear. One of the reasons why we fear for example, spiders. Now, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons, especially if it's a spider that moves very quickly, or any animal that moves very quickly, lizards or anything like that, is because of the chaotic movement and because of the movement being sudden. The fact that it's sudden means that you don't have enough time to protect yourself. The fact that it's chaotic means that you don't have time to protect, and you can't predict the movement. If I can't predict, I don't feel safe, because I'm not in control. We just touched upon that. But in terms of speed of movement, it's the suddenness. The things that traumatize us are the things we did not expect, that suddenly happened. So when you create a sudden shift, sometimes it's a good break, but like I said, there's an exception to that rule. Or there are exceptions to the rule I'm mentioning right now, which is sudden is usually better to be avoided. Gradual is the ideal way to break free from certain behaviors. In this case, separating them. 24 hours, that's cold turkey, one day. I know it's just one day, but it's very traumatizing. This in itself, the separation from a behavior you're addicted to, can be a traumatic experience in itself. Let me say that again. Sudden separation from addiction can lead to trauma. And that's something to keep in mind. So yeah, I completely understand why they feel that way. And here's the thing. If the pain is so strong because it was so sudden, then the need to make sure that that separation doesn't happen again becomes a lot stronger, which means the behavior is harder to stop. Becomes harder to stop.
It's a weird mood for me right now. There's no one to talk to, and I don't know what to do. You know, I can't wait for, like, what is it, like 10 hours now? I probably...
One more thing to add, once you start gradually separating them, for example, or when you stop a behavior for a short period of time that you've been doing every day for all day long, is you need to find in advance, before taking that step, replacements, something, alternative behaviors to kind of occupy the space that the absence of that behavior creates. Because if you have an empty space and you didn't figure out in advance how to use that space, you're going to go crazy. You're just going to go insane. And that's kind of what she's doing, because that's what she's going through, because she doesn't have a replacement, an alternative, something to fill the void that was created by the absence of the behavior.
I've got 14 more hours to go. I don't know what's going to happen.
I miss her like I miss half myself.
Literally.
I can't wait to see her.
Yeah.
I hated that so much. I hated it. I'm never doing this again. No, never.
Of course they don't, especially after that experiment. It becomes a lot harder, like I said, and they can still give it another shot if they wanted to, but the thing is, if they feel so much comfort, if they're so comfortable in the relationship, it feels like an actual relationship, minus elements of an actual relationship. And as long as they feel safe to that level, there's no reason for them to move on. And they will find justifications to maintain this, but it does create limitations. So they may tackle these limitations at some point and then seek help, or they may be triggered intentionally by certain people for them to see that. But obviously, I would imagine they went to a therapist, but they didn't touch upon that in the video, but it's not a problem. At some point, if they do need help, a gradual transition needs to take place. Knowing the reason behind it and satisfying the reason that started that, releasing the emotional impact of the traumatic experience that led to that in the first place. There are many different little pieces. But the most important thing, or the takeaway, I would say, is the graduality rather than the suddenness of things, if that makes sense. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do make sure you like and subscribe. And if you have any ideas or thoughts on recommendations on any video you'd want me to basically comment on or react to, please share it in the comments below. And yeah, I hope you have an amazing morning, evening, afternoon, night, wherever you are. Bye for now.